I moved into Ashbrook Estates in early spring, just as the dogwoods started to bloom and the HOA newsletters began to sprout like weeds. My new house was modest by neighborhood standards, an updated craftsman with a wraparound porch and a view of the park. I'd bought it in cash, quietly, with no agents, no fanfare, and no reason for anyone to notice. Except someone did. Her name was Deborah Whitfield, president of the Ashbrook HOA for 7 unbroken years. A suburban sovereign in beige slacks and pearls. She had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes and a clipboard that seemed surgically attached to her left hand. The first notice came 3 days after I moved in. Subject: HOA violation, improper welcome mat. I laughed. My mat read "Go away." I kept it. Then came the next. Subject: garbage bin visibility, Section 12B noncompliance. Apparently, my bin was visible from the street. For a span of 11 minutes. The notices came weekly after that. Each more absurd than the last. I was fined for unapproved garden gnome placement, low wattage porch lighting, and, my favorite, excessive wind chime noise, despite the fact I didn't own any. Still, I paid them all. Not because I was guilty, but because I had a plan. Deborah mistook my silence for surrender. It was at the May HOA meeting where everything turned. I showed up early. Sat in the second row. Wore a button-down and slacks. I was polite. I smiled. I brought cookies. Deborah stood at the podium like a judge presiding over a petty tribunal. When I raised my hand to ask about the rising violation fees, she didn't even look up. "We do not entertain commentary from renters," she said coldly. "Owners only." The room went quiet. I didn't correct her. Not yet. She continued, emboldened, condescending, proud. And I knew, right then, how this story would end. Because what Deborah didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that I owned more than just my home. I owned her mortgage. Acquired through a bundle purchase from a distressed debt portfolio 6 months prior, her property was one of dozens I quietly collected across the county. I didn't evict homeowners. I refinanced. Negotiated. Repaired. But Deborah? She made herself a special case. The next phase of her campaign began shortly after that meeting. Surveillance. Photos taken from behind hedges. Anonymous complaints signed only with concerned citizen. Neighbors told me she was obsessed, convinced I was part of a secret plot to bring down the neighborhood. In a way, she was right. But not in the way she thought. Deborah didn't just enforce rules, she manufactured them. By the second week of living in Ashbrook Estates, I realized she had turned HOA violations into her personal art form. A canvas of control, painted in red ink and sealed in passive-aggressive envelopes. I got a notice for a trellis, yes, a trellis, supporting 3 heirloom tomato plants in my backyard. Unapproved vertical structure, it read. The fencing along my driveway? Too rustic. The porch swing? Visually disruptive to the community's aesthetic harmony. I responded with a scan of the HOA handbook and a sticky note. Page 7, Section 4B, vertical structures under 6 feet are exempt. She didn't reply in writing. She replied with binoculars. I caught her 2, maybe 3, times peering out her upstairs window, camera lens poking through sheer curtains. Once, she was literally crouched behind a hedge at dusk, furiously scribbling into a clipboard. Her beige sweater glowed beneath my motion sensor light like a ghost of suburban tyranny. She never confronted me directly. Her style was Cold War espionage, anonymous flyers in my mailbox about unregistered tenants, HOA-wide emails warning of property behavior that threatens collective values, and vague whispers about me being part of a renter syndicate. And that's when things began to shift. People started whispering. Side eyes turned into shared glances. Donna and Chris from Lot 14, neighbors I barely knew, slipped me a folded note during their dog walk. We've been dealing with her for 5 years. She's out of control. Let us know if you're doing anything. I was. Quietly. Months before moving in, I had acquired a bundle of distressed mortgages as part of an investment strategy. Most were routine. A few were delinquent. And one, beautifully and poetically, was Deborah Whitfield's. I didn't plan it. But the universe has taste. After refinancing post-2008 crash, Deborah locked into a balloon payment clause, set to mature within the year. Her last 3 payments had been late. Not enough to trigger foreclosure, but enough to make her mortgage vulnerable. Enough to let me step in. Through a legally clean, untraceable acquisition, I now own the debt. Her home. Her kingdom. Her clipboard. When I sent the notice of mortgage assignment and servicing change, I expected cold silence. Instead, I got a hurricane in beige pants. She stormed my porch 2 days later, 9:12 a.m. Saturday. I was trimming azaleas, earbuds in. She was 6 feet away before I noticed. Is this some kind of joke? She snapped, waving the letter like a blood-stained napkin. I pulled out an earbud. Good morning to you too, Deborah. You think you're clever, don't you? Playing landlord with my life? This is a violation of everything. I set the trimmers down. Wiped dirt off my gloves. There's no violation. I bought your debt. Legally. You kept making my life colorful, so I figured I'd return the favor. Her lips quivered like she was about to chew her own tongue. I'll have you removed from this community. I tilted my head, almost playfully. You'll have to ask the HOA board for that. And judging by your approval ratings lately. She turned, stomped off, her orthopedic flats kicking up my mulch like a cartoon villain in slow collapse. By Monday, she had called an emergency HOA board meeting. She accused me of stalking her finances, orchestrating a hostile takeover of Ashbrook Estates. Her speech was fire. Her arguments were made of straw. The board sat through it politely. Then turned to me. And I smiled. Because Deborah had just lit the match to her own political funeral, and the whole town was watching it burn. The board didn't remove her that night. Not immediately. But something changed. The air in the clubhouse wasn't on her side anymore. There were no murmurs of agreement when she spoke, no nods of solidarity. Even Harold, the HOA vice chair and former loyalist, looked down at his notepad the entire time she ranted. Outside, I could hear the quiet of a community holding its breath. The next 2 weeks played out like a slow-motion collapse. Deborah staged a neighborhood information campaign, printing glossy flyers accusing me of being a shadow investor manipulating the moral fabric of Ashbrook. The flyers ended up taped to corkboards, shoved in mailboxes, and eventually piled at the bottom of recycling bins. She called another emergency HOA meeting. Only 5 people showed up. 2 were teenagers using the free Wi-Fi. Then came the surveillance cameras. At least 4 appeared, bolted at strange angles across her property, all aimed directly at my house. A neighbor told me Deborah was adjusting them manually at 3 a.m. with a flashlight and a folding ladder. Mark from Lot 8 stopped by with a thermos of coffee and said, "You know she's gonna snap soon, right?" "I'm counting on it," I replied. What Deborah didn't realize was that while she was building her delusion of control, I was building a case. Documented. Archived. Verified. I had everything. Emails from her HOA account slandering me. Misuse of HOA funds to print her newsletters. False citations. Security footage of her trespassing on my lawn with a tape measure. I waited. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening, I filed a formal motion with the HOA Oversight Committee, a rarely used but fully constitutional body buried deep in the Ashbrook Charter. My file was 147 pages. Indexed. Cross-referenced. Included were 6 affidavits from neighbors, bank documents, and a 1-line cover letter. It is time. The hearing was set. It wasn't a trial. But it felt like one. Deborah arrived in a pastel pantsuit, clutching a binder like it was a purse full of excuses. I came with a 3-ring folder and 3 calm witnesses. The committee let her speak first. She gave a tirade about outsiders, infiltration, moral decay. She painted Ashbrook as the last bastion of order being corrupted by money and manipulation. Then it was my turn. I placed the documentation gently on the table. This is a record of harm. Of manipulation. Of surveillance. Of harassment. I'll let it speak for itself. And it did. After 45 minutes, the committee recessed. 10 days later, Deborah received a letter. Notice of immediate removal from HOA office. She didn't go quietly. At 2:14 a.m., she sent a final, all-caps HOA-wide email titled, "They took everything." It was full of typos, conspiracies, and desperation. By 9 a.m., the board had locked her out of the HOA email account. Her influence was gone. Her status? Erased. But her house? Still mine. Deborah's silence lasted 3 days. Then came the letters. The first was desperate, pleading, filled with veiled threats about lawsuits and personal boundaries. The second tried to bargain, a reduced repayment schedule, some kind of truce. The third, typed in all caps, was pure venom. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, Twachi and Ton Boho So Chot Song Tai Kwan Ly Bat Dong San. Her mortgage was still behind. Late fees stacked like firewood. And the final balloon payment, due in 60 days, was mathematically impossible to meet without a miracle. She tried. She sold jewelry. Listed old furniture online. Held a garage sale where she glared at me every time I passed by. But the math didn't lie. And neither did the documents she'd once signed without reading. 60 days passed. No payment. Foreclosure wasn't a threat anymore. It was a process. And I gave her one final offer: she could stay, as a tenant. At market rate. She refused. 3 weeks later, a moving truck appeared in front of her house. She left in a red sedan with the passenger seat piled high. Her face was stone. Her goodbye was silence. The community held its breath. And then it exhaled. The new tenant moved in, a single mother of 2. I made sure the home was repainted, recarpeted, welcoming. The neighbors helped her move boxes. For the first time in years, Ashbrook Estates felt like a neighborhood again. But fate? Fate doesn't stop until it writes its punchline. Because 6 months later, Deborah returned. Not as a neighbor. Not as a board member. As a renter, 3 streets over. In a duplex she'd once called an eyesore. Her new landlord? A holding company I partially owned. It wasn't planned. But irony doesn't care about intention. She now paid rent, part of which came to me, every month. At the next HOA meeting, someone brought cookies. Someone else made a joke about garden gnomes. Laughter echoed across the newly repainted clubhouse, renamed by unanimous vote. The renters' retreat. Deborah didn't attend. But we saved her a seat. Just in case.